Welcome once again to Dialogue on Public Issues. I'm John Chowning with Campbellsville University. Today I'm pleased to be interviewing a guest that has been on campus in past years, Dr. Albert Reyes, CEO and President of Buckner International. Dr. Reyes, welcome back.
Good to be here. Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Thank you, and it's great to be back.
Well,
here.
we have looked forward to this.
Thank you. Thanks. I'm a native Texan, third-generation native Texan of Mexican descent and background. Grew up in California as a child and then went back to Texas about 10, 11 years old. Went through the public school system and then on to Angelo State University for college work, and then on to Southwestern Seminary for graduate studies. And I answered a call to vocational ministry when I was 15, preached the first time when I was 16, and I'm 60 now, so that's been 44 years ago, doing the same thing in different roles along the way. But just glad to be of service, and it's been an experience I could have never dreamed or planned of.
Now, you've been a pastor as well as other roles in the church.
Right. I during the seminary years, I worked in a publicly traded company that started out as U.S. Telephone and became Sprint, and today is Sprint. So it was a nice business education while I was getting my theological education about the same time. People like Ken Blanchard, who at that time was not a follower of Jesus, and now he is. I was learning from him situational leadership, one-minute manager, and then I pastored part-time and then full-time, so pastored for about 14 years. From there, I became president of Baptist University of the Americas. It was at that time called Hispanic Baptist Theological Seminary in San Antonio. And then I worked to lead the school to become accredited, degree granting, and that was a great work there. And then from there came to Buckner in 2007 and been there now for 13 years.
You mentioned, and we'll get to Buckner in just a moment, but you mentioned your experience with Sprint and Blanchard's work. Have you seen through your career kind of a cross-pollination between leadership training and education in the context of the business world and application to the church, and then maybe some standards of ethics and so forth from the church back to the business world?
I believe so. I think that many of the principles of running a business and accountability and management, marketing, a lot of those principles are transferable into a ministry setting, and we must not forget that every local church is a 501c3 organization in the eyes of the government, IRS, and I know, having been a pastor, that it's not all about Sundays and Wednesdays, that there are things to do Monday through Saturday. There are like business meetings, committee meetings, projects, budgets, facilities. As I look at it, there's a lot of management issues that a pastor has to deal with, unless you are in a very large church and you can delegate to the executive pastor. But like in Texas, 75% of all our churches average 100 or less, or 75 or less. So the pastor's going to get his hands or her hands, either way, involved in the management part. And ironically, we're not trained on those subjects in the seminary. So it's been of huge significance and help for me to having been through, gone through business and having been in a business of my parents, that I learned those concepts as a little boy and then experienced them as a professional, and then now there's a nice blend between management and ministry that carry me today.
I think that's one of the advantages, at least in some cases, of bivocational ministry, is having dealt with the business world or professional experience and taking that and applying it to the church. Not that you can totally run church like a business. There are differences, obviously. But certainly the church must be run and be accountable and be transparent in its fiscal and budgetary and operations. Now let's get back to Buckner. Tell us a little bit about the history of Buckner International.
The history of Buckner is quite fascinating, Brother John, in that we have roots here in Kentucky. Our founder, R.C. Buckner, as a 17-year-old, became pastor of a church in Madisonville, Tennessee. His first pastorate away from his hometown was in Albany, Kentucky, just down the road. I'm looking forward to being there Wednesday night to experience the church and visit with them. He was there for a year. He came as a single man and left as a married man. found a single young lady by the name of Vienna that became his wife. In those days, a pastor received an annual call that every year they decide they want to do one more year. So he only had one call and didn't get renewed. I don't know what happened there, but he then made his way to Texas in 1859 and crossed the Texas border when General Sam Houston was running for governor that year. So he's a contemporary of Sam Houston. And then served the rest of his life there at Buckner. And in 1877, gathered deacons from across the state after having witnessed men that had gone off to fight in the Civil War. Texas was in the Confederacy. Many of those dads didn't return. Moms became widows, children became orphans. To be a single mother in the late 1900s was very difficult. A lot of the women didn't survive. They couldn't find work. Medical attention was scarce. Just providing for their families caused many children to lose both parents. So they became true orphans. R.C. Buckner, having been a pastor, saw what the Civil War did to the state of Texas and said, we have to do something. Gathered the deacons and raised up the verse that pure and faultless religion that's pure and faultless, acceptable by the Father, is to visit orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself undefiled from the world. And so he posed the question, what if it was you, brother deacon, that was dead, and your children left behind? What would you want the church to do in response? And with that, he raised $200 that day. And then they said, when you get to $2,000, you can start. So 2 years later, he was at $1,200. I'm reading between the lines here. He then put $800 of his own savings to get it started. And in 1879, started the Buckner Children's Home in Dallas, Texas. Now 140 years into this ministry and still going strong.
Baptists are noted in several states, as well as overseas, but here in the U.S. There were a lot of children's homes and orphans' homes and widows' homes started by Baptists, were there not, during that era?
Yes, that was the need. In fact, we became the first orphanage west of the Mississippi in the history of the United States. And yet, over the 140 years, we realized that an orphanage is not the best place for a child, but that's what was available then. But we've grown to realize that the best place for a child to grow up and develop is in a family versus an institutional setting. But you're right, that was the thing to do in those years. The first orphanage in the Western world would be in London. There's an orphanage that was begun there, and that tradition carried on to the New World.
Now, the mission in 2019 is much more comprehensive and much more complex. Tell us about the mission of Buckner today.
In some regards, it has not changed, but in other regards, we've had to adapt to our context and our setting. So at the very beginning, R.C. Buckner brought widows to live on the campus that he purchased in 1880, and he brought the first children. So the widows served as matrons for the number of children that came to the campus. Over the years, we've had to adjust and move more towards family-based care. But even in the beginning, we had widows. So even today, we have senior living communities. We have 6 of them in Texas that would be the full continuum of independent living, assisted living, skilled nursing, and memory care. And typically, adults come to live with us in our campuses when they hit 70. You have to be 62 to get in, but usually around 70, 75. And we believe that at the end of life, we should provide services and ministry to people so they can retire with dignity and respect. At the beginning of life, when life is fragile and children don't have families, then we do foster care and adoption. Family Pathways is a program that we have that help single parents. And then those 2 services are after the breakage has happened, the damage has happened, and the child gets separated from his family or her family. The third one is Family Hope Centers that's more prevention oriented. It's the idea of strengthening families to keep the unit together so they don't have to separate, and keep the children in the family where God put them, right? And so we're working to strengthen families so that they don't need our help anymore. So we now have 26 of those in 6 countries and all throughout Texas, 13 cities. And our newest one is being built now in Dallas, Family Hope Center there.
You just touched on this. Buckner is now operating. You talked about Reverend Butler going across the state line in 1859 or 60 and being a contemporary of
Right.
Houston.
Right.
But you're now international.
Right.
Tell us where all you're working in terms of beyond just the borders of the state of Texas, and what prompted that.
Sure. When I've gone to visit the gravesite of R.C. Buckner in Dallas, the epitaph says, "Not one orphan child, but all orphan children." So he had a heart for children beyond the scope, perhaps beyond the imagination. I don't know if he envisioned an international or global scale all these years later, but we are in Kenya, in the Africas. Then in Latin America, our footprint starts in Peru, Honduras, Guatemala, then Mexico, the Dominican Republic. And so we're in those 5 countries in the Western Hemisphere. A lot of work on the border. So we serve families on both sides of the border, whatever the stance may be with immigration or the wall or whatever. We're really not as concerned about that as helping families thrive where they are. And so I've been in Latin America in some of the countries that people come from, and we have a solution to help people survive and thrive where they are, and it's building the family. And we've seen that happen, and where we've seen it happen, we've had the people that live there tell us that their men can come back now because there's work there where there wasn't work before. So that's really our focus, is families and helping them do well. And I've learned from government leaders in Latin American countries that they really are at a loss for how to keep their citizens in place due to crime and then lack of work and economic hardships. And so we aim at those issues and targets, create opportunity for them to survive and do well, and it's working.
What are some of the things that you do in those countries to help those people succeed,
Right.
basically, and to be able to stay where they are?
Right. It's amazing. When we work with families through the Family Hope Center, we work off of a framework that's called the 6 protective factors that every family needs to survive or to succeed. And so there are 6 factors that we then measure that against the family to see what's missing. So, for example, we don't think about how in the world are we going to get electricity into this building to do this broadcast. It's there. You just flip the switch. But if you're missing something in your family that's not in the infrastructure, there's a gaping hole. So we work hard to fill those. But things like parenting skills, the resiliency of children, working with teenagers so they're ready to move into adulthood, vocational skills, ESL, computer skills training, those kinds of equipping that really helps the family get strong. And then identifying their strengths. We're finding that all families have a strength. And rather than call it clinical management, we refer to it as family coaching. Just like we tell our families, even professional athletes need a coach, and the best need a coach. So the best families need help too. And we've seen amazing things happen. One example is in Oaxaca, where we provided some funding from donors, because we do our work internationally 100% from donor support. We provided a water purification project, a poultry project where they have chickens and eggs, and then also a greenhouse where they can grow vegetables. And they didn't know how to use the land that they had or the dirt that they had, so we found some in a riverbed that was conducive to growth, and so we exported that local community in that greenhouse and began to see tomatoes and green bell peppers and lettuce and all kinds of things. I went there on the 10th anniversary to celebrate what had happened. And there was a lady there that was about 4 feet tall, 4.5 feet tall, kind of the representative of the community leader. About 30 women there assembled with a few men in the back. And so she was given the opportunity to do a speech, to say her speech to me. And there was a translator there to translate. And, you're supposed to do a sentence or two and then pause. Well, she didn't pause. She just kept going. Like, I think she probably thought, this is my one chance to get my words out, But in that short time, she said, thank you for giving us the opportunity to work. The water, the poultry, and the vegetable garden has helped us provide for ourselves. And she said, we want you to know we're not afraid to work. We've proven to you that we can make good on the investment. She said, and we want our men who have gone to the north to know they can come back because now there's work here. And as I looked up and saw the men who were in the back, they had come to the U.S., but now they're back. So I think, you know, people really want to survive where they are and succeed. They want to eat, and we try to provide those tools to help them thrive right where they are.
Do your people ever encounter violence or the dangers that we read about in some of the countries? Not trying to stereotype, but violence and gangs and so forth, at least in some of the countries, maybe not the ones you're working in, but that is a part of the issue of immigration coming to America.
Right. There definitely are things that happen with crime and violence and gangs and drug trade, and it's definitely in existence. And I don't want to be naive, but I also think that there's certain parts of Dallas that I would not advise you going to.
Certainly.
At a certain hour, you know. So the nice thing about it is that we employ indigenous leadership.
Good.
They know the culture, the language. They kind of know where you should and shouldn't be. They recognize the signs, and so we encourage their safety as well.
Sure.
But yeah, there is definitely a higher level, I think, in general, of kidnappings and things like that you have to be aware of, and yet with the right circumstances and the right resources, families can even thrive in those contexts as well.
How do you find the issues the families in those countries are facing back in Texas? How do they compare, or are they very similar?
Well, it's interesting that the people that I've met in Dallas, there's a 3 square mile area with 90,000 people living in that 3 square mile heavily populated, densely populated area, apartment complexes. And as I've gone to meet some of the folks and I've met them in the public schools in that community, I ask, where are you from? And they will tell me Peru, Honduras, Guatemala, Mexico, so they're from all the places where we serve. So in that sense, it's really the same people group, they're just north of the border. I would say that in non-ethnic communities like, let's say, Midland, Texas, where there's a lot of oil, drilling and exploration, you know, culturally diverse, but lots of issues with families. These families are just taking a beating. People have to work long hours, sometimes both parents. So the issues are slightly different. Maybe there's an economic advantage, but families still struggle. And so I see a lot of things in that 3 square mile area. Children are removed from their families twice the average of the county of Dallas. Teenage pregnancy is 3 times the national average. See some of those things in other places that are not necessarily ethnic communities. The family today in America is just really struggling. And I think my next book's going to be about the family and how to strengthen it. But yeah, I wish we weren't as in demand as we are, because it's just tough. There's about 6,000 children in Texas in out-of-home care, 600,000 across the country. So families are hurting, and that's why I think, you know, they need hope right now. That's why I wrote that book.
Tell us about the book. You just gave me a courtesy copy.
Yes.
And I appreciate it very much. Look forward to reading it. Tell us about your book.
Well, the book is very interesting. The first book I wrote was The Jesus Agenda, and the idea is that I wanted to look at his first sermon in public and see how he outlined what he was going to do in his ministry, and it's pretty much all there. The second book, I really started thinking about what families need today. Back to your question of what the needs are, what's happening. And there was a song in the 1960s, Jackie DeShannon, what the world needs now is love, sweet love. And so that was about the time that JFK was assassinated, Martin Luther King was assassinated, Bobby Kennedy was assassinated. I was a little baby, I was a little boy, but I remember my dad being affected by that, and our country just seemed to be saying, we just need to try love instead of hate, you know. And yet, as I catalog what's happened between that era of the 60s to now, second, third decade of the 21st century, while I think that's a good notion, I think what the world needs now is hope. Hope will come before love, because I don't know that it's getting better, right? You know, things are pretty rough. And so I wanted to write the book Hope Now, and then the subtitle is Peace, Healing, and Justice When the Kingdom Comes Near. There's a lot packed in that sentence there, but it comes out of the Gospel of Luke, chapter 10, Luke 10, 1 through 9. I chose a missionary commissioning. You recall the 72 that went out, 36 teams of 2, to really look at, was this really about evangelism or was there human welfare involved? And therein lies the issue that I feel like I've grown up with an awareness of 2 teams in Baptist circles and church circles, and maybe not just Baptist, but there's the evangelism team that focuses on spiritual things. There's a human welfare team that focuses on physical things. They don't always work together.
Right.
In fact, sometimes they throw rocks at each other. You know? And so when I examined Jesus, I saw that he doesn't have 2 teams. He does both, 2 sides of the same coin. So I'm lifting that up as an issue to say there really shouldn't be 2 teams. It should be one, and we should interchangeably integrate those things. And Exhibit A is Jesus. Exhibit B is R.C. Buckner, because that's what he did. You know. So it's a story that it examines the biblical theological concepts and principles on those questions, but then it gives examples in Buckner work of how it plays out. Very practical.
I don't know that this is kosher for an interviewer to say a hearty amen to,
to
what you just said, brother, but I would say a hearty amen because that you much more eloquently than can I just articulated my personal definition of the Great Commission, the way I read it, and put all of Jesus' teachings together. It's not an either or. We've made it in Baptist life and others, but in Baptist we've made it an either or. The great divide, we can call it. There should not be a great divide. It's all in one.
Part of the research, Brother John, that I found at Oxford, the Oxford Center for Mission Studies in Oxford, England, I went there for a sabbatical, and I found in the research that no mission agency until the 20th century ever declared that they did one or the other. It was understood that you do both, but it wasn't until the 20th century that certain things happened that we said, no, that's apples and this is oranges and they don't mix. And so that's really a recent phenomenon of the 20th century.
Was it a result of the great divide between the fundamentalist movement and the social gospel movements of the early 20th century, or that was maybe those movements were an outgrowth of that, or all interrelated anyway?
Yes, Rauschenbusch and the social gospel declaring the importance of that and their own philosophy. Then the Lausanne Conference sort of crystallizing the wording that, well, we do evangelism, and then that just split. So then you had agencies and even churches leaning one way or the other. But at the very best, we're doing both. That's what R.C. Buckner did. He started with healing and then backed into peace. And sometimes with peace and then served the needs. But he always did both. And it's an incredible legacy. And
it seems that in some parts of Baptist life, at least, we're beginning to recapture that. We're beginning to see the picture and recapture the vision.
I part of the book is I say that, you know, there's nothing wrong with the harvest. Not a thing wrong with it. The problem is that we're not in it. And Jesus said the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. The answer is to pray to the Lord for more workers and then get in it, you know. And what we do at Buckner is we get our hands, we're the messengers, we get into the mess with the message, and we have a hard time keeping up with the opportunity to tell about Jesus. It's just, once you show up in a bad situation to start the healing process, people want to know why. Why did you come here? Why would you spend your money to come here? And we point to Jesus, and it's almost like they want Bibles, they want to study the Bible, they want to pray, and it's hard to keep up with.
One of the areas that I noticed in preparing for this interview that you are doing is that of family pathways. You mentioned that briefly. What does that work involve? And what are some of the challenges in doing that particular work? And we've alluded to the challenges facing our families.
You know, the Family Pathways program is a wonderful program. We have 8 campuses in Texas. The way we've set it up, and we bumped into it by exploring options, and a community college president who knew about us said, look, I've got some land here and I've got students, but they have needs, single parents that want to come to school, but they have needs. So we built some cottages right next to the college campus, and we did all the social services while they were students. So now 8 campuses later, we say you have to be college ready, a single parent, mom or dad. You come with your children, live on the campus, And you got to be a good student. You got to go to class. So we have a coach that help them become good students. The goal line is for them to graduate with a degree, get a job, have a checking account, a savings account, and to be able to maintain their family economically, sustain them with the kids intact, with their families. And some stay and do a BA, some do a master's, and we found that that's a great way to restart the family and strengthen them so they don't have to be asking for help. And financial independence and sustainability is the goal. So we do that, and we have counseling to help break those cycles. So when we saw that some were graduating from the program and their kids were coming into the program, we thought, no, it shouldn't be a loop. It should be breaking the cycle so their kids don't have to experience that. So really very exciting.
Foster care is a big issue across the country. Obviously it is in Texas. Buckner is heavily involved in foster care. How many children in Texas approximately are in need of foster care right now?
There are about 6,000 children in out-of-home care. So this means that the state has had to remove them from the home and they're in some type of care other than their family of origin. And so we placed 1,100 children in foster families last year of the 6,000. So we're pretty involved. The state outsources to us as an agency. Our job is to call and train and invite parents to go through the training, get certified, and be ready. So when the state calls with a child, the family's ready to receive that child. And the average stay is about 140 days. And there might be multiple placements. What's happening now, the trend is for parents start out as foster parents, and we call it foster to adopt. So they start out at fostering, end up adopting the child. If the child can't go back to the family and they're without a family, we then do a state adoption.
Where does your funding come from?
Our funding has several streams. Some is from the part of the interest off the endowment that we have as a portion. Then we do receive some fee for services from the state, but it's typically in the neighborhood of 75 cents on the dollar. So I still have to raise those quarters. It's a lot of quarters when you talk about $39 million budget.
Right.
And then of course philanthropic support, donors, and some churches add to the resources there. That's how we.
If anyone would like to learn more about Buckner, how can they go about it?
The best way is to go to buckner.org, buckner.org. So www.buckner.org. And there's a place there to learn about what we do and how to get involved.
And you do receive money from Kentucky, I know.
We do, nationwide. Yes, we do. So we thank you all for the support. It's very, very helpful.
Dr. Albert Reyes, thank you so much. Keep up the good work at Buckner International.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for visiting Campbellsville and Campbellsville University, and have a safe trip.
Thank you. My pleasure.
This is John Chowning for Dialogue on Public Issues with Dr. Albert Reyes. Thank you.